Halloween has always fascinated me. The one night of the year when the world pretends to flirt with darkness, when fear becomes fun and masks give us permission to be something we're not. But beneath the laughter and the costumes, there are stories that don't fit the cheerful image of plastic pumpkins and candy bars. Real stories, the kind people whisper about when they think no one else is listening. Tonight, I want to tell you 10 of them, 10 Halloween nights that started like any other and ended in ways that still make my skin crawl. Story 1, The Disappearing Trick-or-Treater. I've always believed that Halloween brings out the truth in people. For one night, the masks make honesty easier, the shy become loud, the cruel pretend to be kind, and everyone hides behind a joke. But every now and then, the mask slips and something too real stares back. The story of Ryan Ellis started like that. A 10-year-old boy, a plastic vampire cape, and a neighborhood that thought it was safe. It was 2008 in a small Ohio town, the kind of place where the biggest crime used to be a stolen lawn gnome. I was freelancing for the local paper back then, covering human interest pieces, fall festivals, high school football, the occasional lost pet. When Ryan disappeared, they sent me to write the kind of sympathetic article that usually ends with a miracle reunion. Only this one never did. His mother told me the same thing she told the police, that she watched him walk down the driveway, cape fluttering, a cheap pair of fangs still in his mouth. He was meeting 2 friends on the next street. He never made it there. What struck me wasn't the fear in her voice, it was the guilt. She said she almost went with him, but stayed to finish carving a pumpkin instead. It was just 2 blocks, she kept saying, like the words could rewind time. The search started within an hour. Dozens of volunteers combed the wooded path that cut between the 2 streets. They found his candy bag lying on the ground, the handle torn. The wrappers inside were from 3 different houses, which meant he'd made it most of the way. A trail of footprints, small, running, led a few yards into the trees and stopped at a puddle of mud where the ground dipped. On the other side, tire marks curved sharply toward the road. The police called it a possible abduction, but there were no witnesses, no screams, nothing. Just a silence that swallowed the night whole. I interviewed every parent on that street. One of them, a retired teacher named Mrs. Corbin, told me something that didn't make it into the official reports. Around 8 p.m., she saw a white van parked near the trail entrance. No logo, no plates she could read, just the sliding door cracked open and a man standing beside it. He wasn't wearing a costume, just jeans and a sweatshirt. She thought he was waiting for his kid. When the boy disappeared, she realized she never saw the man again either. The police followed hundreds of leads, but weeks turned into months, and Ryan's face slowly faded from the posters taped to the lampposts. I moved on to other assignments, though the story never really left me. 2 years later, while covering a charity event in the same town, I met one of the original detectives. Over a few beers, he told me the part that never reached print. During the first night of the search, one of the K9 teams picked up a scent trail that led back to the Ellis house, to the backyard, and stopped at the pumpkin Ryan's mother had been carving. Inside the pumpkin, pressed against the inner wall, they found a single muddy fingerprint, too large to be the boy's, too small to belong to either parent. The print didn't match anyone in the system, and it was found on the inside, not the outside. Years later, a family moving into a new home 2 towns over reported finding an old Polaroid tucked behind a basement pipe. It showed 3 kids in Halloween costumes from the 1970s standing on a wooded path. A 4th figure, a small boy dressed as a vampire, was blurred, as if he'd stepped into the frame at the last second. Forensics said the film stock was at least 30 years old. I went to see it myself. The boy's cape had a tear on the left side, the same as Ryan's. No one could explain it. Sometimes I drive through that neighborhood on late October nights, the streetlights dim, the porches glowing orange. Parents walk their kids house to house, laughing, calling out reminders to stay close. The trail is still there, though the town fenced it off after too many trespassers. If you park nearby and roll down the window, you can hear the wind push through the trees, and for a second it sounds like fabric moving, like a cape brushing against leaves. People say the missing never really leave the places they vanish from. Maybe that's true, or maybe on Halloween, when the world pretends not to notice the dark pretends not to notice us, just long enough to take one more. Story 2. The house that wasn't supposed to be there. I first heard about the house from a police report that never made the news, a missing persons case, technically unsolved, but the officers involved all described it the same way. Wrong. It was Halloween night, 2014, in a suburb outside Madison, Wisconsin. A family of 4, Tom and Renee Lawson and their 2 kids, had been out trick-or-treating with friends. Around 9 o'clock, the group split up to head home. The Lawsons took a shortcut through a quiet cul-de-sac called Briar Court. The kids, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, ran ahead. There were porch lights on, carved pumpkins glowing, the usual decorations. But when the children turned a corner, they saw a house at the end of the street that none of them remembered. It wasn't unusual looking, that was the odd thing. A 2-story craftsman, gray siding, a big front porch with railings, a plastic skeleton hanging from a hook. Every detail seemed right, but wrong in ways they couldn't define. The windows were dark, yet they swore they saw movement inside, shadows shifting like someone walking by candlelight. The kids ran up, excited, calling to their parents. Renee said she felt uneasy the moment she saw it. She'd lived in that neighborhood 8 years and walked that same route dozens of times. The lot at the end of Briar Court had always been empty. Her husband laughed it off, said maybe the owners finished construction recently. The children were already climbing the steps. A bowl of candy sat by the door with a sign that read, "Take as many as you like." The handwriting looked oddly formal, the letters perfectly spaced. The boy reached for a candy bar, and that's when they heard it. The faint sound of a piano playing inside. Not a tune from the radio, but something old-fashioned, graceful, out of time. Renee told them to leave it and come back, but Tom knocked anyway just to say thanks. The music stopped immediately. After a moment, the door opened a few inches. She could smell something sweet, like candle wax and rotten leaves. A woman's voice from inside said, "Happy Halloween," soft and polite. Tom started to thank her, but the door closed again before he finished. They shrugged, turned around, and walked home. It wasn't until the next morning that things began to unravel. When Renee drove back through Briar Court, the end lot was empty again. Just dirt and grass, no driveway, no porch, nothing. She thought she had the wrong street, but she didn't. The neighbors confirmed there had never been a house there. They all remembered the Lawsons mentioning the new place, but when they went to look, it was gone. The police investigated, thinking maybe someone had set up an elaborate haunted house attraction and removed it overnight. But there were no tire tracks, no debris, no leftover props. A few days later, Renee found something on her porch, a single piece of candy wrapped in gold foil. She recognized it immediately. It was one of the bars from the bowl on that house's steps. When she unwrapped it, she found a slip of paper inside instead of chocolate. It said, in the same neat handwriting, "Thank you for visiting. Come again next year." That's when the nightmares began. She said she'd dream of standing on that porch again, hearing the piano, and when the door opened, there'd be no one behind it, just a hallway stretching endlessly into darkness. The dream stopped after a few months, but she never took her kids trick-or-treating again. I spoke to the detective years later. He told me something he never put in the official file. A month after the incident, he went to check the property records for Briar Court. According to the city archives, there had been a house built on that lot once. Same address, same description, same floor plan, but it burned down in 1971 after a Halloween party gone wrong. 4 people died inside, including a pianist who used to teach in the neighborhood. The property had remained empty ever since. I can't explain what the Lawsons saw. Maybe they stumbled onto an elaborate setup, a prank so perfect it fooled an entire family. Or maybe sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. It just finds a way to reopen its doors for one more night. Every October, I drive past that cul-de-sac. The street looks ordinary enough, but there's a patch of grass at the end that never seems to grow right, always darker than the rest. I've never stopped to look closer. Some houses are built to be lived in. Others just wait. Story 3. The Mask in the Mirror. I met Claire Monroe when I was working on a local history column. She lived alone in a small apartment above an antique store, the kind of place where everything creaked, the floorboards, the window frames, even the air felt second-hand. She was quiet, polite, and always offered coffee before talking. What she told me that afternoon wasn't supposed to be a horror story. It was meant to be about old traditions, Halloween parties in the 70s, how people used to make their own costumes from paper and glue. But as she talked, the tone shifted. It started with a mask. When Claire was in college, she worked part-time at a thrift shop to cover tuition. Every October, they'd haul out a bin of old costumes donated from estate sales, plastic witches, fake blood kits, rubber noses. One year, buried under the heap, she found a mask unlike the others. It was porcelain, painted white, with faint pink cheeks and black diamond shapes under the eyes. Beautiful, she said, but unsettling. The inside smelled faintly of dust and old perfume. The tag said, "Venetian Mask, circa 1920s. She bought it for $5. She kept it on her dresser, thinking she might wear it for Halloween. When the night came, she put on a simple black dress and tied the mask around her face. She told me she'd never felt anything like it, how cold the porcelain was against her skin, how tight the ribbon pulled at the back of her neck, how quiet everything became once it was on. The party she went to was typical: music, laughter, cheap beer, but she said people kept reacting strangely to her. Friends she'd known for years claimed they didn't recognize her voice. Someone even asked if she'd brought a date. She went to the bathroom, looked in the mirror, and saw what she described as a delay. Her reflection didn't move quite in sync. It smiled a second after she did. She laughed nervously, thought she was drunk, and took the mask off. The reflection still had it on, only for a moment, but she swore it happened. She left early that night and never wore the mask again, but she couldn't throw it away either. Every time she tried, it would somehow end up back in her apartment, once on the kitchen counter, once hanging from the back of her closet door, once sitting on the bathroom sink facing the mirror. She stopped inviting people over. She said the mirror started to bother her too, not just the one in the bathroom, but any reflective surface. Sometimes, while brushing her teeth, she'd see the mask appear faintly behind her, its painted smile softening as if breathing. When she finally moved out, she left the mask on a bench outside the thrift store where she'd bought it. That should have been the end of it. But 3 years later, when she was living across town, she got a call from a student who bought some vintage decor from that same shop. He'd found her number on the back of an old photograph tucked inside the mask. It was a picture of her from college, taken at that Halloween party, only she wasn't wearing the mask in the photo. The reflection in the mirror behind her was. Claire didn't go back to the shop. She stopped keeping mirrors in her apartment. When I interviewed her, she covered the one on the wall with a sheet before sitting down. She told me the mask wasn't cursed. It wasn't that simple. It was something about faces, about how easily we mistake the reflection for ourselves. Every mask, she said, teaches you what you already were willing to hide. A few months after our talk, the antique store caught fire. The cause was never determined. When firefighters cleared the rubble, they found very little left intact, just shards of glass and melted metal. But in the debris, they found a porcelain mask, unbroken, the paint still perfect, lying face up. It didn't belong to the store's inventory. The owner swore they'd never sold or displayed anything like it. They say it was still cold to the touch when they picked it up. Sometimes I think about Claire, her covered mirrors, her small, careful way of speaking. When she talked about that night, her eyes stayed fixed on the corner of the room, as if watching something move just behind me. I asked her once why she kept telling the story if it scared her so much. She said it wasn't fear, it was responsibility. Because someone will find it again, she told me, and when they do, they'll want to know what it is. I just hope they realize it's not the mask they should be afraid of. It's what it remembers. Story 4, the candy bowl incident. Every town has that one house that everyone remembers from childhood, the one that gave out full-sized candy bars that everyone whispered about on the walk home. For me, it was the Davison house, a large 2-story place with a wraparound porch and a massive oak tree out front. Every Halloween, Mrs. Davison would set a huge glass bowl filled with candy on the porch steps, with a handwritten note taped to it that said, "Take one and leave the rest for others." She was kind, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and asked about your parents by name. I hadn't thought about that house in years, not until I came across a local forum thread titled "The Candy Bowl Incident." Do you remember? At first, I thought it was nostalgia bait, but as I read through the comments, the tone changed. People weren't reminiscing, they were trying to make sense of something. Dozens of users described the same night, Halloween of 2003, when they had gone to the Davison house and seen the candy bowl empty far too early, even though no one remembered anyone taking more than one piece. Some said they saw a figure sitting on the porch that year, watching. A man, not Mrs. Davison. But the strange thing was, nobody could agree on what he looked like. Some remembered him wearing a scarecrow mask. Others said a blank white one. Others swore it was just a man with paint smeared over his face. I decided to dig into it. And when I called the local historical society, one of the archivists told me that the Davisons had moved away years ago, sometime around 2005. She said Mrs. Davison passed shortly after, but Mr. Davison was still alive, living in a care facility about 30 miles north. So I drove up there one gray afternoon and asked if he'd be willing to talk about Halloween 2003. He didn't hesitate. In fact, he seemed relieved that someone finally asked. He said that was the year his wife had been sick, bedridden from chemotherapy. She had insisted he keep the tradition going to leave the bowl out so the kids could still enjoy Halloween. Around 7 that night, the doorbell rang. Thinking maybe a neighbor had brought her flowers, he went to the door. But no one was there, just the bowl, already empty, even though he'd filled it only half an hour earlier. He thought kids had taken more than they should, so he refilled it, then went inside to watch from the window. That's when he noticed the man. He was standing just beyond the edge of the porch light, motionless. Mr. Davison said it was hard to see his face, but he was tall, wearing a coat that looked too big for him, with something dangling from his left hand, maybe a mask, maybe a hat. Every time a group of children walked up, the man would step back into the shadows, and when they left, the bowl would be empty again. It happened 4 times. Finally, Mr. Davison went outside and called out to him. The man didn't move. He just tilted his head like he was listening. "I told him to get off my property," Davison said. He turned, walked down the path, and vanished. When he went back inside, he noticed his wife staring out the upstairs window. She told him there had been a man watching her from the yard all evening. They thought it was a prankster, maybe someone from the neighborhood. But that night she developed a fever worse than before, and within 2 weeks, she was gone. He paused then, rubbing his temples. "That wasn't the strangest part," he said. "The strangest part was the candy." After she died, he was cleaning out her nightstand and found one of the same candy bars from that Halloween, still wrapped, but it looked slightly off. He opened it. Inside was a folded strip of paper, not chocolate. In handwriting that wasn't his or hers, it said, "She saved enough for me too." Mr. Davison said he burned the rest of the candy after that. He moved away, tried to forget, but every Halloween, no matter where he lived, he'd find a single candy bar on his porch, the same brand, the same gold wrapper, and once, just once, he said he saw someone standing across the street, still as a statue, wearing a mask that caught the streetlight like porcelain. I left the care home with my stomach in knots. When I got home that night, I searched the town's property records. The Davison house had been demolished in 2006 after a fire of unknown origin. The only thing recovered from the rubble, according to the fire report, was a glass bowl. It was intact, not melted, not cracked, just blackened by smoke. People like to think evil announces itself loudly, with screams, with blood, with spectacle, but sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it sits on a porch, smiling, waiting, while we tell ourselves there's no harm in taking just one piece. Story 5. The Wrong Doorbell. It was one of those cold, windless Halloween nights that feels unnaturally still. No rustling leaves, no footsteps, just that heavy kind of quiet that presses against your skin. I was living in a duplex on the edge of town at the time, and the street had maybe 6 or 7 houses total. It wasn't the kind of neighborhood where people usually went trick-or-treating. Too far out, too dark. That year, I was home alone reading when the doorbell rang. It startled me because I hadn't expected anyone. When I opened the door, a little girl stood there in a princess costume. She couldn't have been more than 7. Her dress was faded pink satin, and she wore a plastic tiara tilted slightly to one side. Her face was pale, not in a makeup way, just pale, and her eyes were downcast. In her hand, she held a small brown paper bag, no parents in sight. I smiled and said, "Hey there, I'm sorry, I don't have any candy this year." She didn't respond. She just looked past me into the house and then back up at me. Her voice was barely above a whisper when she said, "I think I got the wrong house." I told her it was okay, asked if she knew where she was supposed to go, but she just kept staring like she was waiting for something. I offered to help her find her parents or walk her back to the main street, but before I could step outside, she turned and walked away. Not ran, just a slow, steady walk down the sidewalk, her dress dragging across the concrete. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed. A message from my neighbor across the street, Kim. She asked if I'd just seen a little girl in a princess costume. I texted back, "Yeah, she just left here." Kim responded almost instantly. "That's weird. She just rang my doorbell too." I looked outside again. The girl was gone. The road was empty, lit only by one flickering streetlight. I decided to walk out and check, thinking maybe she was lost and going house to house. I reached the corner, but there was no sign of her anywhere. Just a faint sound like fabric dragging across asphalt. I turned toward the sound and saw movement at the end of the street. A figure standing under the dead streetlight, holding what looked like a brown paper bag. I called out, "Hey, are you okay?" The figure didn't move. I took a few steps forward, but the light flickered and went out. When it came back on, the street was empty. I went home, locked the door, and told myself it was nothing. But when I checked my phone again, there was a new message from Kim. It said, "She came back. She asked for you by name." I didn't sleep that night. Around 2 in the morning, I heard my doorbell ring again, one sharp chime that echoed through the house. I froze. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then came a second ring, and then another. I forced myself to the window and looked through the blinds. The porch was empty. No little girl, no one at all. The next morning, I walked across to Kim's house. She looked exhausted. I asked what happened after her last text. She said the girl had shown up again just before midnight. Same dress, same paper bag, but this time, when Kim opened the door, the girl smiled, a small, tired smile, and said, "Sorry, I was supposed to go next door." He said he'd help me find home. Kim assumed she meant me. She pointed across the street and said, "That's his house." The girl nodded and walked away, but when Kim closed the door, she realized the girl had left the paper bag on her porch. Inside were old photographs, black and white pictures of houses that didn't exist anymore. One of them was a duplex with a number 41 on the door. My address. I still have that photo somewhere. It's the same layout as my house, but the image looks older, maybe from the 50s or 60s. There's a man standing on the porch, blurry, his hand raised as if waving. The little girl is in the picture too, standing beside him, holding his hand. Only the man's face isn't visible. It's completely blank, like someone had painted over it. I moved out a few months later. Sometimes when I'm driving through town, I think I see her, just a glimpse of pink fabric disappearing around a corner. Every Halloween, I leave a small bowl of candy outside my door, just in case. Not for the kids. There aren't any here for her, because I don't think she ever did find her way home. Story 6, The Silent Parade. This one still plays in my head sometimes, especially when October nights get too quiet. It happened 5 years ago to a friend of mine named Aaron. He was the kind of guy who never bought into ghost stories or Halloween hysteria. He used to call it the annual excuse for grown-ups to act scared of kids. He didn't like crowds either, so he always volunteered for night shifts when the town held its Halloween parade. Our town was proud of that parade. It had been running since the 1930s. It was small, sure, but it had heart, marching bands, floats from local schools, people in homemade costumes tossing candy to kids lined along Main Street. Every year, the same routine. Except that year, something changed. The city decided to cut costs and cancel the fireworks, meaning the parade would be shorter and darker than usual. The only light came from the street lamps and the flicker of jack-o'-lanterns that residents placed on their porches. Aaron's job was simple. Keep an eye on the barricades at the far end of Main Street, where the parade would finish before looping back. He had a folding chair, a thermos of coffee, and his phone. Around 9, the bands had packed up and the street started emptying out. He texted me to say it had been a good night, quiet, peaceful. But 15 minutes later, he sent another message. Did they start a second parade? I didn't understand what he meant, so I called him. He didn't answer. The next morning, I went to see him. His apartment was dark, curtains drawn. When he finally opened the door, he looked like he hadn't slept. His voice shook. when he said, "They walked right past me." He told me that after the main crowd dispersed, he started hearing music again, faint at first, like a distant band tuning up. But when he turned toward Main Street, he saw movement in the dark. A second parade was coming down the road, completely silent except for the sound of footsteps. Dozens of people, all wearing costumes, but not like the ones from earlier. These were older, faded, tattered like clothes pulled from attics and thrift stores. None of them were talking. None were smiling, just walking in a perfect slow rhythm, each one holding a lit candle. He said the strangest part was how real they looked. Their faces weren't painted. They were bare, pale, as if drained of color. He tried calling out, asking if this was some after-hours event, but no one responded. When the procession reached the end of the street, they stopped. The first person, a woman in a long black dress, turned her head toward him and raised her candle. Her eyes, he said, were the darkest he'd ever seen. Aaron blinked, and just like that, the candles went out. The street went dark. When he shined his flashlight, the road was empty. No footprints, no wax drips, nothing. He thought maybe exhaustion was getting to him. But when he checked the barricades, something caught his eye. A small card tucked into the hinge of the metal gate. It was yellowed and brittle, the edges burned slightly. It said, October 31st, 1936, Route 2, Memorial Procession. He brought it home, thinking it was some leftover piece from an old parade, but when he tried to look up the date in the town archives, he couldn't find anything. Finally, he asked one of the older historians at City Hall. The man got quiet when Aaron showed him the card. "That's not from a parade," he said. "That was from the memorial. The year those kids drowned during the float accident." I didn't remember any story like that, but Aaron said the man showed him a newspaper clipping, 4 children and a driver killed when their float overturned into the river during heavy rain. Halloween night, 1936. The route ended right where Aaron had been sitting. He still has the card, though it's starting to crumble. Every year since then, he refuses to go out on Halloween. Last time we spoke about it, he said something I can't shake. He said he didn't think the people he saw were ghosts or visions. They didn't look lost, he told me. They looked like they were waiting for the rest of us to fall in line. Story 7. The Pumpkin Light. There was a house at the edge of town that everyone called the Hollow, though its real address was 54 McHenry Road. It sat on a sloped field that looked almost skeletal when the trees lost their leaves. Long, bare limbs, dry grass, a wind that always seemed to find its way through the cracks in your clothes. Nobody lived there anymore, not since the Cartwright family moved out a decade ago after what people simply refer to as the incident. I'd passed that house hundreds of times and never thought twice about it until last Halloween, when I finally met someone who told me what really happened inside. Her name was Lila Cartwright, the eldest daughter, now in her 20s. I met her by accident at a coffee shop near the college. We were both waiting for our drinks, and she noticed the small pumpkin pin on my jacket. A souvenir from a local festival. She stared at it for a long time before saying, "Do you know what happens if you leave a pumpkin lit overnight after Halloween?" Her tone wasn't playful, it was cautious, like someone repeating something they wished they could forget. When I said no, she told me her story. Back when she was 14, her family had moved to that house in late September. Her dad was a carpenter, her mom a teacher, and her younger brother, Ben, was 7. Halloween came fast that year, and they were still unpacking boxes, but her dad wanted to make it special. He carved a single large pumpkin and placed it in the window overlooking the field. Lila remembered the smell of the candle wax mixing with the cold air as they turned off the lights to admire it. Sometime after midnight, she woke up to the sound of her brother talking. At first, she thought he was dreaming. His room was across the hall, but when she went to check, he wasn't in bed. The house was dark, except for the faint orange glow coming from downstairs. She crept down, calling his name softly. Ben was sitting on the windowsill beside the pumpkin, whispering to it. The candle inside flickered, throwing shapes across the walls. When Lila asked what he was doing, he smiled and said, "He's telling me stories." She thought it was a game, but when she looked closer, she saw that the flame inside wasn't steady. It pulsed, almost like it was breathing. Their dad found them minutes later and sent them back to bed, laughing it off as Halloween excitement. But the next morning, the pumpkin was gone, the candle too. All that was left on the sill was a thin black ring, as if the glass had burned. Her father assumed an animal had dragged it off the porch. That night he carved another one and set it outside again, determined to keep the spirit alive. He lit it just before bed. Lila said she woke again around midnight, but this time it wasn't to her brother's voice. It was to footsteps moving through the hallway, slow and deliberate. She opened her door and saw a faint glow coming from the staircase, just like before. She followed it down and stopped halfway when she saw her dad standing in front of the window. He wasn't moving. The pumpkin sat on the sill again, flickering softly. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then her dad leaned forward, pressing his hand against the glass, and whispered, "There's someone outside." She looked past him into the dark field and saw it too, a shape tall and thin, standing just beyond the reach of the porch light. It wasn't moving, just watching. Her father unlocked the door and stepped out before she could stop him. The air smelled sharp, like burnt wax and earth. He called out once, then again. The figure turned and began walking toward the woods. Her father followed. Lila never saw him come back. By morning, her mother was frantic, calling the police. They searched the field, the woods, even drained the creek. No footprints, no sign of a struggle, nothing. Only the pumpkin remained, sitting on the porch, unlit. The candle inside melted into a solid lump. The house was empty within a month. Her mother couldn't bear to stay there, but before they left, Lila went upstairs one last time to her brother's room. He was sitting by the window again, staring out at the field. When she asked what he was looking at, he said he'll bring Dad back when the light comes on again. She told him to stop talking nonsense and pulled him away. He screamed, saying she blew out the candle too soon. They moved across town, started over. For years, nothing happened. Then one Halloween, when Lila was 18, she looked out her bedroom window and saw a faint orange glow on the horizon, exactly where that old house used to be. She said it flickered 3 times like a heartbeat, then went dark. The next morning, they got a call. Her brother was gone, vanished from his dorm room, his phone, wallet, everything left behind. I didn't know what to say when she finished. She laughed quietly and said, "I know how it sounds." But when she turned to leave, she added, "Just don't leave a pumpkin lit past midnight. It doesn't like to be alone." That night, I couldn't stop thinking about her story. I went to 54 McHenry Road. There's nothing there now, just a stretch of uneven field and a few half-buried stones that might have been the foundation. Still, when I stood there, I thought I saw something faint in the distance, a tiny flicker of orange in the dark. I told myself it was just someone's porch light. I wanted to believe that, but as I turned to go, I caught a whiff of smoke and candle wax, faint but unmistakable, and for a moment it felt like the ground itself was pulsing beneath my feet. Slow, rhythmic, alive. Story 8. The voice on the radio. Some stories don't need monsters, just silence, static, and a voice that shouldn't exist. I was working as a local journalist when I heard about the Halloween broadcast. It happened in 2017, late on October 31st, on a small community radio station called WQBR. The host, a man named Daniel Brooks, had run a yearly Halloween show for nearly a decade. It was simple. Listeners called in to share their real-life, scary stories. He'd play ambient music, laugh, and sign off around midnight. But that year, something different happened, something the surviving staff still refused to talk about on record. I pieced it together from archived call logs and a handful of police reports that never made it public. The first hour of the show went as usual. Prank calls, ghost stories, the usual local weirdness. Then at exactly 10:47 p.m., a new caller came on the line. The transcript only labeled him as unknown male. Daniel greeted him cheerfully, asking for his name, but the man just said, "You can call me Jack." The first thing Jack said was, "You're not alone in the studio, are you?" Daniel laughed, said no, he was alone like always, but Jack insisted. "You shouldn't be," he said. "Check the door." According to the sound engineer's log, Daniel paused for a long time, then asked if this was some kind of prank. The caller said, "No prank. I just wanted to say thank you for letting me listen all these years." Then the line went dead. At first, Daniel thought nothing of it. Halloween was full of weird calls, but a few minutes later, the station phone rang again. It was the same number. This time, Jack sounded closer, his voice less distorted by static. He asked Daniel to play a specific song, something called The Road Home. Daniel didn't recognize it, but Jack began to hum the melody through the receiver. It was soft and haunting, looping in a minor key. Here's where it gets strange. The engineer in the back room reported that the line wasn't connected to any active number. It was coming from inside the building. When he checked the internal lines, one was still live. The booth phone. He ran to tell Daniel, but the door was locked. When they finally forced it open, the booth was empty. The recording light was still on. The music bed was looping quietly in the background. The microphone picked up faint breathing for almost 40 seconds before cutting out. The police arrived within half an hour. They searched the building, every hallway, every exit. No sign of Daniel. His car was still in the lot, his coffee half finished on the desk. The next morning, the morning shift host found a tape reel sitting neatly on the console. It wasn't labeled, but when they played it, the tape contained exactly 7 minutes of audio. Daniel's voice saying, "Welcome back to WQBR. It's been a long time." Then a pause, then the same humming, the tune Jack had hummed. At the end of the tape, Daniel's voice came back quieter. "If you're hearing this, don't answer when he calls. Don't let him in." The FCC shut the station down 2 weeks later due to technical anomalies. The building was sold and converted into office space. But here's the part no one could explain. For the next 3 years, every Halloween night, between 10:45 and midnight, radios in the county would sometimes pick up a faint signal, a male voice humming "The Road Home." The first year, people thought it was a hoax. The second year, they realized it wasn't interference. It came in on the same frequency WQBR used to broadcast on. The third year, a driver recorded it on his dashcam radio. The voice thanked him for listening, asked if he was driving alone, and then, just before the recording cut off, the faint sound of a door opening. I tried to track down the original song to see if The Road Home ever existed. The only record I found was an obituary for a musician named Jack Porter, a former WQBR employee who died in a car crash on Halloween night, 2007, 10 years before the broadcast. He'd written a piece called The Road Home for a radio contest that never aired because the station deemed it too depressing. The article included a photo of Jack smiling beside a microphone in the same booth Daniel disappeared from. Sometimes when I'm driving late at night, I scan through local stations just to fill the silence. Every so often, the static seems to break just right, and I swear I hear humming, faint and familiar, playing through the speakers. The melody always ends the same way, on a long, unfinished note, like someone waiting for an answer. Story 9, The Final Costume. There was a thrift store on the corner of Larch and Heller that used to sell Halloween costumes all year round. It wasn't one of those trendy vintage shops. It was old, dusty, the kind of place where the mannequins looked like they'd been staring at the same door for decades. The owner was a woman named Miriam, who'd run it since the late 70s. Everyone in town knew her. She had a reputation for being kind, if a little strange. She remembered every customer's name and claimed she could always find the costume you were meant to wear. I first heard about her from a guy named Travis, a photographer who did seasonal shoots for the local paper. In 2019, he went in to rent a few costumes for a Halloween feature, retro masks, fake capes, that kind of thing. When he told Miriam what he needed, she gave him a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes and said, "I think I have something better." She led him to the back of the shop where there were racks of old garments covered in plastic. The air smelled like mothballs and candle wax. She pulled out a garment bag and said, "This one's special. It's never been rented." Travis asked what it was supposed to be, and she said, "Whatever you want it to be. It just finds the right fit." He thought it was a sales pitch, but when he opened the bag, he saw an old-fashioned suit, black wool, perfectly tailored, with a half-face mask sewn into the collar. The fabric was cold, almost damp. Miriam told him it had been donated decades ago by a theater troupe that shut down after their lead actor collapsed on stage. She didn't say why. Travis rented it anyway. He said he felt uneasy wearing it, like the fabric tightened every time he moved. When he looked in the mirror, the mask seemed to blend into his skin, the eye holes too narrow, the mouth stretched wider than before. But the photos came out incredible, moody, surreal, perfect for his Halloween spread. He joked that the costume had brought him to life. The night before publication, he called me. He sounded shaken. He said he was reviewing the photos and noticed something wrong. In every shot where he wore the costume, there was someone standing behind him in the mirror, half in frame, just out of focus, wearing the same outfit. He thought it was an editing glitch until he checked the negatives. The figure was there too. The next morning, the newspaper editor called me. Travis hadn't shown up for work. His apartment door was locked from the inside. The police found his camera on the kitchen table, still turned on. The last photo was a self-portrait taken sometime after midnight. He was wearing the costume again, but this time the half mask covered his entire face, the fabric pulled tight over his head like it had grown there. The timestamp showed the photo had been taken at 12:01 a.m., the exact moment Halloween ended. The police went to the thrift store to question Miriam, but she was gone. The place was stripped bare. No costumes, no racks, no mannequins, just empty space and the faint smell of wax. They found one thing left behind, a garment bag hanging on the door. Inside was the same black suit, neatly folded, spotless. The label read, "For rent." A few weeks later, I got an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was a photograph. It was the same image of Travis in the costume, only now he was smiling. Behind him stood Miriam, one hand on his shoulder, her face half covered by the mask that used to belong to him. I don't know who took the photo. I don't know how they found my address, but every Halloween since, someone leaves a plastic hanger on my porch with a tag attached that says, "Your size has arrived." Story 10. The neighbor who never existed. I moved into that house in early October, thinking I'd found a quiet place to start over. It was small, 2 bedrooms, peeling paint, the kind of place you rent because it feels temporary. The neighborhood was nothing special. A row of modest homes, a few families, a cul-de-sac that dead-ended at a wooded lot. The landlord said it was mostly older residents, people who liked their privacy. That suited me fine. The first person I met was the man next door. He was maybe late 50s, tall, polite in an old-fashioned way. His name was Richard, though everyone seemed to call him Mr. Lang. I met him while unloading boxes from my car. He stood on his porch with a mug of coffee and said, "You picked a good time to move in. The neighborhood really comes alive in October." I laughed, said I'd heard it was quiet, and he smiled like I'd just told a private joke. He had a calm voice, the kind that made you feel safe. Over the next week, he'd wave every morning when I left for work, and sometimes I'd find small things left on my porch, apples, homemade cookies, once a little pumpkin with my initials carved into it. I figured he was just being neighborly. Then Halloween came. That night I stayed home handing out candy. Around 8:30 I ran low, so I stepped outside to see if anyone else was still handing out treats. Most of the houses were dark. Only Mr. Lang's porch light was on. He was standing in the doorway, still wearing his cardigan, smiling at a small group of kids in costumes. I waved, but he didn't seem to notice. The kids thanked him and ran off, and then he turned to me. "Quiet night," he said. I nodded. He tilted his head and added, "It's nice, isn't it? Seeing everyone out like old times." We talked for a few minutes, nothing strange. He said he'd been here his whole life, that the neighborhood used to have block parties, hay rides, that sort of thing. Then he asked, "You're staying long, I hope?" I said maybe a year, depending on work. His smile faltered just slightly. "It's better when people stay," he said. I went back inside and didn't think about it again until the next morning. That's when I noticed something odd. His house looked different. The curtains were gone, the porch bare, the light fixture that had been on last night was missing. I walked over to ask if everything was okay, but when I knocked, the door swung open. The inside was empty, no furniture, no boxes, nothing. The walls were stripped down to the plaster, the air thick with dust. I called out his name, but the sound just echoed. I checked the mailbox, empty. I even peeked around the back. It looked like no one had lived there for months. That afternoon, I asked my landlord about him. She frowned and said, "There's no one living next door right now. That house has been vacant since last winter. The owner passed away." I told her that was impossible. I'd spoken to him face to face just last night. She looked at me for a long moment, then said softly, "Was his name Richard Lang?" When I nodded, she exhaled through her nose and said, "He was a good man. He died in that house last October. Heart attack, they think. It was Halloween night." I didn't know what to say. I went back home, trying to convince myself she was mistaken, but that evening, when I stepped onto my porch, there was something waiting on the railing, a small pumpkin carved with my initials, the candle inside still burning. I called the police, though I didn't even know what to report. They checked the area, found no one. The next morning, the pumpkin was gone, but on my welcome mat, written in fine white chalk, were 3 words. "Thanks for staying." I moved out before the end of the month. Sometimes, though, I still dream of that street, of Mr. Lang standing on his porch, waving as if I'd never left. In the dream, the houses stretch on forever, each one with a single light in the window, flickering, waiting. I wake up before I reach mine. Halloween has always been about pretending the dead can walk among us, pretending monsters are only stories, pretending that the masks we wear don't hide anything real. But the truth is, every mask is a doorway, every joke about fear, a quiet invitation. Maybe that's why these stories keep happening. Maybe the night itself listens, waiting for someone brave or foolish enough to believe in it. So when the candles burn low and the streets go silent, remember, the stories you laugh at tonight might be happening to someone else, somewhere close by. And if you hear a knock at your door after midnight, maybe it's better not to open it at all.